Rory's Great Uncle, from the book Rula's Not Stupid Anymore, and Other Short Horror Stories, by Grant Crowther, narrated by Herrick Destin, and illustrated by Elena Rogers.
Rory's Great Uncle. A lone carriage rattled along an old trail through the heart of a thick, untamed woodland. This forest, famed for its dense canopy and teeming wildlife, filled the air with an eerie symphony. Fearsomely loud buzzing from enormous insects, strange and unknown bird calls, and the occasional distant howls of predatory mammals. At the reins of this horse-drawn carriage was Rory, a kind and resilient man, traversing a path that led towards an uncertain fate. Rory was an intense man who bore an expression of chronically knitted brows and squinted eyes. His lean and wiry build came from years of hard labor. His smile was kind but terse, and he was a man of few words. Yet, beneath this rugged exterior lay a heart as tender as early spring's leaves. Known for his compassion, Rory often lent a helping hand and was always first to be called for when trouble brewed. He bore the badge of the helper with a quiet pride, his actions resonating louder than any boastful words could. Along with this, Rory had a genuine love for animals of all kinds, and it was common to see creatures flocking to see him as if drawn by an invisible bond. Indeed, his kind nature was what led him here to this eerie path. Upon discovering a mysterious letter among his correspondence, Rory's attention was immediately captivated. The letter, penned by an unidentified scribe, detailed the frailty of his great uncle, Harold, and the pressing need to prepare his remote cabin for the harsh winter ahead. The penman claimed that after his or her urging, the only name the old curmudgeon would give as a trusted caretaker was Rory himself. This revelation was especially startling, given that Rory had been informed of only 2 brief encounters with this elusive uncle during his infancy. As he journeyed down the uneven dirt trail, Rory ruminated on the strangeness of his current predicament. The setting sun cast elongated, foreboding shadows that seemed to prance alongside him, heightening his sense of unease. He was en route to the dwelling of Uncle Harold, a figure whose elusive nature had been the crux of many whispered tales throughout Rory's life. This great uncle, his mother's own uncle, was an irascible hermit known for his odd behaviors and preference for solitude. Stories about him range from the darkly intriguing to the outright macabre. One particular chilling rumor claimed Harold had committed murder years prior, seeking refuge in the woods to evade justice. Yet even more ominous whispers spoke of occult dealings, with one woman emphatically declaring that a curse from Harold had been the malevolent force behind her children's untimely deaths. Rory, who was a man of good humor, diverted these ominous thoughts from his brain by reciting aloud a somewhat humorous poem he remembered from an elementary school recital. As a child, they had been forced to memorize it for Halloween. In the mist of moonlit night, where shadows loom and offer fright, a gentleman sped in carriage fine, to sound of hooves in steady line. Abruptly, from the roadside, a ghost appeared, eyes open wide. The man gasped, reins in his grip, but the ghost just sought companionship. "May I join for a ride, kind sir?" asked the specter, voice a blur. With a nod, the man made space, and together they set a casual pace. Amidst the trees, side by side, they rode, one alive, one from an ethereal abode. As the path twisted ever so deep, man found company he would forever keep. Rory chuckled softly, finding amusement in his own reminiscence. As he spoke, His voice, rich and resonant, echoed through the dense woods. Around him, the once vibrant soundscape shifted. The cacophony of wildlife, the bird songs, buzzing of insects, and rustling that had just recently animated the forest seemed to pause and listen, casting the surroundings into an unexpected, hushed silence. It seemed that the wilderness took a different persona after Rory's little poetic recital, but perhaps that was also because dusk approached. Now the light cast odd shadows, and he could have sworn he felt eyes on him from the trees. The sounds of nature that had earlier offered company now became a more foreboding sound, like chilling echoes of caution. Each rustling leaf, each hoot and howl, a veiled harbinger of some impending doom. It felt as though the forest itself was pleading with him to turn around and return to the town he was from. Bathed in the dwindling twilight, the young man pressed forward. His steel blue eyes flickered between apprehension and determination. Rory was not a man to be shaken from his decisions by a little fear, so he shrugged off the sensation, steeling his nerves. He was here for good reason. To turn back now would be dishonorable and cowardly. He scolded himself for even pondering the notion. As Rory's carriage clambered along the ill-timed path, the darkness grew thicker and more foreboding. Suddenly, a pitiful mewling sound pierced the silence. It was a raw, desperate cry that coaxed him to slow his horse. There, huddled near the side of the road, beside the underbush, was a pathetic creature, wounded and left to die. Lying helpless in the dirt, it was a baby moose, its minuscule form dwarfed by the surrounding gnarled trees. And gingerly descended from the driver's perch. He approached with a hint of trepidation, the sight before him demanding a more intimate inspection. This pathetic creature on the ground bore an unsettling deformity. Its front left leg, grotesquely mutated, sprouted an aberrant limb, jutting unnaturally. At the culmination of this limb was a fifth, fully formed foot. Although Rory was typically not one to indulge in superstitions, this eerie malformation hinted at something more sinister. Drawn out of duty and sympathy towards the uncanny spectacle. Upon deeper investigation, the moose's pelt was matted with blood, bearing a tangle of cuts and gashes. He noticed the wounds weren't random. They were specific shapes etched deep into the animal's flesh. So specific they could only have been carried out by a human hand. Symbols, Rory realized with a shudder. What cruel human could carry out such a sadistic deed? Odd glyphs that bore a strange familiarity, a language he didn't understand, but couldn't shake off the feeling that he'd seen before. Despite the gruesome sight, Rory couldn't help but feel an overwhelming urge to help the creature. He was a beacon of compassion in a world that often harbored shadows. He could never just leave such a helpless calf to die. Hurriedly, he returned to his wagon and retrieved the kit he had brought full of medical materials. The contents had been intended for his uncle, but he had more than enough to spare. Kneeling by the baby moose, he gently cleaned its wound with alcohol, then bandaged the animal's wounds, wrapping long strands of gauze around the body of the calf, who seemed to understand Rory's benevolent intentions. His large and calloused hands moved delicately, a gentleness that stood in stark contrast to his rugged exterior. The moose's wide eyes conveyed only trust and obvious pain. As he fastened the last of the bandages, a memory abruptly surged within Rory. The very letter he had received, penned by the unknown hand, bore peculiar scribblings grazing its margins. At the time, he had dismissed them as mere whimsical doodles. However, in this moment, their likeness to the symbols etched into the calf's hide became hauntingly apparent. The possibility of any connection between the letter and the afflicted creature seemed ludicrous, utterly implausible to his rational mind. He chided the fleeting thought, attributing it to his own timidity, mentally berating himself for his weakness. Chastising himself for entertaining such a preposterous notion, Rory resolved then and there not only to dress the calf's wounds, but to take the creature under his care. Abandoned in this vulnerable state, it would inevitably fall prey to the forest's predators. Instead of surrendering it to such a grim destiny, with considerable exertion, he hoisted the calf and positioned it securely in his wagon's rear. True to his nature, Rory and the perennial protector assumed responsibility for the beleaguered being, shouldering yet another charge in his life's litany of burdens. The remainder of his journey was brief, and it wasn't long before Rory encountered the singular divergence in the woodland path. The side trail recounted to him by his mother, who had once traversed it many years prior, beckoned him. Guiding the carriage leftward, he embarked upon the less trodden lane that surely led to his great-uncle's abode. Rory's thoughts wandered to the kind of existence one would lead in such seclusion. The sheer remoteness of the place suggested that even for a man of his own mettle, enduring a winter solitarily would be a monumental endeavor. Preparations for its arrival would be extensive, preserving food through canning, pickling, and meat curing, maintaining the integrity of the dwelling, perhaps tending to any livestock. The mere act of chopping and stockpiling the necessary firewood would be an arduous task. How, he mused, had his great-uncle sustained himself in this isolation for so many years? Before him stood a classic wedding cabin, neatly built with a small porch at the front and a peaked roof overhead, nestled perfectly at the trail's end. As Rory neared, the cabin's features became clearer. Orange light from lanterns streamed from the square windows, indicating that the old man was indeed home. He spotted hints of newer wood and recent repairs among the aged timber. It was clear that, despite his age, his uncle had put effort into maintaining the place. The cabin, crafted from durable oak, had taken on a richer shade over the years. Time and weather had left their marks on its exterior. The roof, with its wooden shakes, appeared slightly bowed, as if weighed down by years of memories. Nearby, a sturdy barn stood. Simple in design, it offered a safe haven for animals seeking protection from the unforgiving wild. This barn, made of the same seasoned wood as the cabin, showed signs of careful upkeep. Stacks of hay were piled under a covered port. A large wooden tub of water sat at the rear, and he saw what looked like two goats standing, staring back at him. Guiding the carriage to a halt, Rory directed both his horse and the injured calf towards the barn. As he entered, two goats bleated in curiosity, moving aside to allow passage. He led his horse to a vacant stall, making certain it was separate and settled. Nearby, a water pump caught his attention. Filling a bucket, he ensured his horse was hydrated. After attending to his steed, he saw to the needs of the moose calf in similar fashion, grateful that two stalls were at his disposal. Aside from the goats, which had their own spacious dwelling and sheltered sleeping nook, there seemed to be no other residence. He gathered hay from nearby stacks, spreading it in each stall. As the animals settled in the cozy shelter, a comforting realization washed over Rory. Despite the oddities he faced, there remained the consolatory touch of the familiar in his surroundings. Now, turning to the cabin, Rory steered himself for what lay inside. He walked down the little pathway leading to the front door, making a conscious effort to remain calm, even jovial. As it was, he was here in good faith, and the anonymous writer of the letter had stated his uncle had specifically asked for him. So why did he feel such an edge of fright? He knocked at the door and waited a few moments, with no reply. He tried once more. After waiting a laborious moment, he tried the door handle and found it was not locked. So he slowly pushed it open, its hinges whining in protest. Rory stepped into the amber glow of the room within. The cabin was small and neatly organized. The furnishings were functional and sturdy, worn by use. A wooden table and chair, a bookshelf stacked with an impressive assortment of leather bindings, an array of oil lamps hanging on all walls, and an old hearth filled with a perfectly stacked fire, looking as though it had just been set ablaze, warming the room, but there was no one to be seen. "Hello?" he called out. "Uncle Harold? It's Rory, your nephew." He tried to say cheerfully, but the anxiety in his voice was apparent. Still standing in front of the open doorway, he glanced around the room. He did not want to scare his uncle. His arrival was indeed unscheduled. The postman did not deliver mail to such a remote location, so he had no way to contact the old man to tell him he was coming. He had hoped to arrive earlier in the day, but the delay with the baby moose had caused him extra time. He closed the door behind him, took off his shoes, and ventured further into the room. He saw a ladder that led up to a lofted area above the sitting room. He could just glimpse what looked to be many boxes and other storage items up there. He noticed a slightly open door at the back of the house that must have led to the bedroom. Despite the humble arrangements, there was certainly a homely appeal to the place, though with an eerie ambience. Drawing a deep breath, Rory fortified his resolve, pushing away the rising trepidation. Here he stood, entrenched in the enigmatic realm of his great uncle. Though the decor evoked a semblance of comfort, certain pieces starkly belied the eccentricity of the cabin's resident. The walls showcased a gallery of art, each crafted masterfully, yet their subjects teetered on the macabre. Among the still lifes and portraits, one painting particularly caught his eye, a banquet spread with apricots, apples, and corn. However, dominating the scene was a gruesomely rendered leg of lamb, its excessive sanguine spill meticulously depicted as it flowed off the table's edge. Another canvas showcased a woman, remarkable in technique but unsettling in portrayal. Her sparse thin hair barely concealed a nearly bald scalp, and a pronounced underbite made her bottom teeth jut out unsettlingly. Her countenance bore the vacant, disconcerted look of a creature lost in its own world. He wondered what would draw a man to hang such work all about his home. Rory's attention was next drawn to the unsettling array of literature adorning the bookshelves. A cursory perusal revealed titles that sent shivers down his spine. Cambridge studies of biologic anatomical anomalies, an illustrated compendium, the intricacies of numerology and the occult, and an archaeological exposition of Balkan death rites. Such arcane subjects gave rise to disconcerting thoughts. Were the whispered rumors concerning his uncle's dalliance with the darker arts rooted in reality? Rory's boots creaked on the worn wooden floor as he crossed the cabin towards the bedroom door, where his great uncle must have been. The echo punctuated the eerie silence. As he neared the slightly open door, a peculiar sound reached his ears, a steady undercurrent to the quietness of the cabin. It was a low, persistent mumbling of words that Rory couldn't quite understand, spoken in a language that was alien and unsettling. Venturing a peek into the room, he saw what had to be his great uncle. The man was lying flat on a worn bed, his unkempt hair a wild mess around his gaunt face. His eyes were glazed over and unfocused, giving off an empty stare that seemed to see into another reality altogether. His lips moved continuously, babbling an incessant stream of incomprehensible words. Rory's gaze settled upon the man before him, evoking an involuntary shudder. The haunting image mirrored tales whispered amongst townsfolk or similar unfortunate fates, the chilling grip of catatonic psychosis. From his understanding, those consumed by this affliction became eerily detached from reality, trapped in the maze of their own mind. Such souls often exhibited rigid stances, unsettling motions, and heart-wrenching disconnection from the world. To Rory, it appeared as if his great uncle was submerged in a relentless nocturnal abyss, lost deep within his tortured thoughts, far from any comfort or understanding. It was as though he was imprisoned by his memories, reliving haunting episodes, or trapped in nightmarish delusions, each more harrowing than the last. In this chilling revelation, Rory understood he was confronting a situation far more complex and menacing than he had imagined. Yet, a more pressing concern tugged at his consciousness. If his uncle was in such a grievous state, who had been caring for the house? Who had ignited the lanterns and stoked the fire? A cold dread crept down Rory's spine as he grappled with these unsettling thoughts. Positioning himself in a wooden chair thoughtfully situated by the bed, Rory's gaze was immediately captured by a disconcerting artwork hung above the bedstead. This particular piece portrayed an eerie landscape rendered in meticulous oil strokes, depicting what seemed like an otherworldly terrain. The ground bore unnatural shades of deep purple and crimson, and the sky above was nearly black, but illuminated by a far-off moon that gave off a sickly pale white hue. Dominating this desolate vista was a creature of bewildering design. Its features hinted at an aquatic origin, yet it stood defiantly on robust limbs. The being's yellow and black eyes seemed alive, piercing through the canvas and fixating on Rory with an unnerving intensity. Hastily shifting his gaze from the grotesque masterpiece, Rory turned his attention to his relative. "Uncle Howard?" He ventured gently, wary of jolting the man from his unnerving trance. However, his calls were met with silence. Despite several gentle attempts to rouse his uncle, Rory was met with continued indecipherable babbling, directed mostly towards the ceiling. A sobering realization dawned on him. He would find no answers from his kin. Instead, the very walls of this chamber seemed steeped in untold tales and mysteries. These time-worn barriers, having absorbed the peculiar events that bore witness to, now seemed to whisper their cryptic tales to a wary Rory. From the hushed shadows, a malevolent whisper began to weave its way into the room. A ghostly sotto voce that caressed Rory's ears as if birthed from the very timbers encasing them. He pivoted sharply, endeavoring to pinpoint its source, but was met with only motes of dust pirouetting in the singular moonbeam that pierced the grimed window pane. He mentally chided himself, attributing the unsettling auditory illusion to his heightened state of anxiety and the oppressive atmosphere that seemed to cloak the cabin. Yet, as if heeding this ethereal summons, his uncle's ceaseless, delirious mutterings began to morph. They took on a rhythmic cadence, echoing in a tongue unfamiliar to Rory but unmistakably deliberate, harmonizing with the enigmatic murmurs that filled the air. A bone-chilling epiphany dawned upon him. Perhaps his great-uncle wasn't merely ensnared by the clutches of his troubled psyche. Instead, he might have been the unwilling host to some spectral presence, a force from realms unknown that sought to torment both mind and soul. Rory jolted, as though physically attempting to dislodge the eerie rumors that plagued his thoughts. They persisted, however, as the faint brush of a moth's wing yet undeniably present. Rising from his seat, terror's icy grip took hold. His uncle's eyes, previously lost in their own feverish world, suddenly and disconcertingly fixed on Rory, seeing him, it seemed, for the first time, yet his lips continued their strange recitation. Uncle Harold's fingers, reminiscent of gnarled talons, clung fiercely to the frayed quilt draped over him, their pallor contrasting starkly with the fabric. Taking a steadying breath, Rory addressed the older man, striving for calm in his tone, infusing his voice with as much authority as he could muster. "I must insist that you cease this unnerving behavior," he continued. "I'm here to aid you, for it's clear you're unwell. Please find some semblance of calm." Remarkably, his words found their mark. The frenetic chanting ceased, and Harold, seemingly mollified, returned his gaze to the cabin ceiling. The spectral whispers that had haunted Rory also faded into silence. With a shuddering exhale, Rory embraced a momentary respite from the cabin's oppressive aura. He quickly left the bedroom, needing to separate himself from the chilling experience he had just endured. He went out to the main room again and found a seat on the little couch that sat in front of the fireplace. Here, he took a moment to ponder his situation. Rory couldn't help but draw a disturbing connection between everything. The stories told in town about his great uncle, the strange disfigured moose he had found, the disturbing artwork and books inside the house, his great uncle's unsettling condition, and the haunting whispers in the cabin. Were they all pieces of a terrifying puzzle? A dread-filled anticipation clung to Rory, a sickened certainty that he was on the precipice of discovering something that was profoundly and terrifyingly wrong. As Rory tried to find some calm in the midst of the unnerving circumstances, he turned his attention to settling into the place for the night. There was definitely no hope in turning back. His poor horse couldn't do another long ride without rest, plus it was nighttime now. On top of that, he knew that no matter how frightening the circumstances might be, he could never live with himself if he left the old man now. He was clearly incapacitated. Although the cabin was inexplicably clean and well equipped, he could not leave him in the state he was in. The only option would be to take him away from here. This was a thought he would ponder, but there was no immediate danger to flee from, just his own tingling nerves. "That's enough fretting about nonsense, you old lady," Rory said to himself angrily, and so he set about doing what he did best. Getting things done. Rising from the couch, he returned to his wagon and began unloading all of his things, bringing them into the house. His dear mother had meticulously packed items for his trip. She had been very worried before he left, and he wondered now if she had known more about the old man than she had let on. There were crates filled with pickled vegetables, cured meats, bags of flour and sugar, and all sorts of other domestic items his mother had thought to pack with him. He also had a few suitcases full of clothes and some books to read. After getting everything back into the cabin, he set about looking for the best place to sleep. The couch seemed inadequate in size, and the other chairs lacked the comfort needed for a night's rest. Contemplating a makeshift bed by the warmth of the hearth, an idea struck Rory. The lofted storage area above might have something to aid his comfort. Ascending the petite ladder, he discovered a space far more expansive than anticipated. To his surprise, it was replete with spare blankets, plush pillows, and even a modest mattress perched atop robust storage crates. It was curiously set up, mirroring a well-appointed bed with its crisp sheets, snug woolen comforter, and cushions arranged to double as a sofa backrest. It bore an uncanny resemblance of being prearranged for his visit. Could it be that his uncle sought refuge here during sweltering summer nights? Depositing his bags in this newfound alcove, Rory felt a touch more settled. With his sleeping arrangements in place, his attention shifted to the care of the elderly figure. With newfound composure, Rory re-entered the bedroom, the disturbing aura of his uncle now less pronounced. Bypassing the incessant murmurs, he set about seeking fresh attire for the man. The clothes his uncle donned were lamentably soiled, marred with drool and other mysterious stains. Some bore a disturbing resemblance to blood. A thorough search of the neatly arranged drawers yielded a clean set. Carefully and with some effort, he undressed the frail figure, finding, to his relief, no signs of injury. The bloodstains, it seemed, did not belong to his uncle. Rory shook his head, then reprimanded his own morbid thoughts. "Clearly it's not blood then," he whispered to himself. Thanks to Rory's youthful vigor, he managed to redress the rigid frame of the older man with minimal struggle. Securing a fresh bedsheet, he replaced the old one, curiously marred with holes as if gnawed upon by an animal, and draped it over the recuperating calf in the barn. Back inside, Rory gently combed through the man's unkempt hair and attempted to hydrate him. However, his efforts were met with sudden gush. The water regurgitated almost instantly. Hoping at least enough water had settled into the man's stomach to give a little sustenance, he resigned himself for the night. Preparing for slumber, Rory chanced upon a modest wash area tucked away in the kitchen's recess. Rather than being a separate chamber, it seamlessly merged with the kitchen, a practical design considering the lone inhabitant. A sizable wash basin, partnered with a robust water pump and accompanying pail, stood ready. The water it yielded was crystalline and inviting. Adjacent to the kitchen, a door led outside an outhouse, underscoring the cabin's self-sufficiency. The intricacies of the home, like strategically placed water pump, bore witness to thoughtful design and preparation. Concluding his nightly ablutions, Rory felt drawn to the array of books lining the walls. Weathered shelves, their wood richly stained, cradled a trove of leather-bound tomes. Their well-thumbed spines whispered tales of decades, their titles spanning science, philosophy, and arcane knowledge, albeit almost all of which held a macabre tilt. Amidst this collection, Rory spotted one volume that stood out from the rest, a black leather book, much larger than the others. The spine looked very used. The title, now almost illegible, Geomancy and Sigils of Abkhazia. Rory removed the heavy tome from the shelf and brought it with him to read through up in the loft. In the dim, flickering glow of lantern light, Rory perched upon the quaint bed, drawn irresistibly to the foreboding book before him. With bated breath, he carefully opened its time-worn pages, only to be met with a ghastly array of illustrations and writings that sent chills down his spine. The book was a masterwork of dark arts, teemingly with meticulously detailed drawings of arcane symbols and step-by-step guidelines to rituals that bore unspeakable malevolent titles. Here were rituals for hexes, malefactions, and the invocation of infernal entities, each delineated with chilling precision. Foreboding and mysterious symbols integral to the ceremonies were sketched with unnerving care, accompanied by sinister chants, each meticulously annotated to denote the precise moment of recitation. Ghastly sketches of animals marked for sacrifice and eerily lifelike renditions of specific demons danced across the pages. Rory's pulse quickened. A disturbing realization dawned upon him. The symbols etched into the tender hide of the young moose bore an uncanny resemblance to those that haunted the pages of this very book. Under the lantern's muted glow, the foreboding contents of the book held Rory captive, the revelations even more chilling against the backdrop of his uncle's distant mutterings, emanating from the bedroom below. The enigmatic and twisted pronunciations of his uncle reverberated through the cabin's time-worn beams, but amongst the tangle of syllables he could hear one clear phrase was repeated, Atankagoni Wachat. These unfamiliar words, otherworldly in their cadence, filled Rory with a shiver of dread. Desiring escape from the creepy unease, Rory hastily shut the book, yearning for the refuge of sleep. But as he reclined on the bed, a tangible sensation of fright took hold, rendering relaxation elusive. The ambient whispers, previously soft, now surged in intensity, becoming a maddening chorus in the night stillness. Within the room, the play of firelight created grotesque ballets of shadows that seemed animated with malevolent intent. But, as Rory's gaze flitted about, seeking something to comfort him, or at least ground him in reality, they fell upon a collection of crates stacked to the side. Nestled within were time-worn decorations and relics of bygone days, Christmas decorations, flyers from a variety of entertainment shows he had saved, and a portrait of a solemn-looking couple that very well may have been Rory's great-grandparents. He had never seen pictures of them himself. His mother had always been a little secretive about her own upbringing. Seeing these forgotten remnants of his uncle's former life gave him a small shred of comfort. He found solace in knowing that at least at some point in time, his uncle had been a normal member of society. Then his attention caught upon a finely crafted parchment, a calligraphy-sketched family tree that was set inside of a wood-trimmed frame. The family tree was labeled with his mother's maiden name, Mannix, and it traced his mother's lineage back many generations through elegant lines and intricate loops. Rory's eyes landed on a familiar name, his own, and curiously beside it, a delicately inked star had been scribed, seemingly penned in more recently, its presence a troubling enigma. By this point, Rory was under no illusion. This cabin, these dense woods, were tainted with an evil that made his skin crawl. His great uncle seemed to be part of the darkness that lurked in the very air of the place. Doubt started to gnaw at his resolve. Who had sent the letter asking specifically for his help? What was the true intention of those letters? And now, with the realization of his uncle's dark interests, why should he remain here? The thought of spending winter isolated in this cabin unsettled Rory deeply. He imagined being surrounded by thick layers of snow, cutting him off from the outside world with only the ceaseless mutterings of his unhinged uncle for company. It was a daunting prospect, amplifying the eeriness of his surroundings. After a few hours in this pondering state of torment, Rory's mind finally relented, allowing fatigue to take hold, and he succumbed to a troubled sleep. Started from his uneasy dreams, Rory felt a cold wetness against his face. His pulse raced as his eyes snapped open to the disturbing sight of his uncle looming over him, saliva dripping from his gaping mouth, snarled and twisted to one side, eyes bulging with a madness Rory could only interpret as murderous. Glistening threateningly in the dim illumination was a sharp kitchen knife. A surge of terror lent Rory unexpected agility. He jerked upright, narrowly avoiding a frenzied lunge from his uncle, whose knife whizzed through the space he'd just vacated. Slipping from the mattress to the ground, Rory instinctively grabbed his uncle's ankles, causing the older man to lose balance. He spilled onto the floor, slamming the back of his head against the boards, the knife skittering away. A guttural sound of digest and fear rose from Rory's throat as he took in the grim scene of what had just occurred. His uncle, now sprawled on the ground, squirmed in a pitiful and desperate manner. Like an overturned turtle, he flopped his arms about, utterly incapable of righting himself. "What possessed you to come here?" Rory's voice quivered with a mix of fear and incredulity as he addressed the man, though deep down, he knew his words would find no coherent reception. "Were you trying to kill me?" To this, his great-uncle only responded with his continued nonsensical babbling and useless flailing about. Drawing a deep breath, Rory collected himself for a few heartbeats before approaching the wretched man. He first secured the errant knife, tucking it securely out of reach. Then, with a mix of caution and concern, he hoisted the old man into a seated position. Their eyes locked, yet what stared back at Rory were orbs devoid of any semblance of recognition or humanity. His eyes appeared more like a fish's, blank and vacant. "Are you even in there at all, Uncle Harold?" Rory whispered, but his words were lost, falling upon the dead ears and saucer-sized eyes of the aged man, who only stared aimlessly whilst he babbled. The task of moving the unstable elder from the loft to the bedroom below was arduous. Rory marveled at how his uncle, in his weakened state, had managed such a feat on his own. Safely back in the bedroom, Rory faced a heart-wrenching decision. For both their sakes, he had to restrict his uncle's movements. With a heavy sigh, he secured the old man to the bedpost, using a cord of rope he found in the kitchen, ensuring it was firm yet not painfully tight. Exhausted and troubled, Rory retreated back to the loft. His thoughts spun chaotically. Could it be, he wondered, that the malevolent forces detailed in that accursed book were the puppeteers behind his uncle's disturbing antics? The mere idea froze Rory to his core. He was a simple man, unequipped to face such dark and ancient forces. Did he even have any hope to change things? He pondered his options. Should he stay and try to wrestle his great-uncle from the clutches of this malevolent force, or should he flee this haunted place out of the concern that maybe he, too, could fall victim to its curse? The answers eluded him as he once again tried to settle his brain and return to sleep. Knowing that his uncle had been secured to the bed did give him a little bit of relief, and eventually his exhausted brain succumbed to sleep. As if in response to his predicament, nature seemed to conspire against him the very next day. A storm rolled in, bringing with it an ominous chill that hinted at the approach of snow. The thought of being snowbound there sent shivers down his spine. No matter what, riding home that day was not an option. It would be too risky to make such a long trip in that weather. Rory focused himself on household tasks. He took care of the animals, attending once again to the grotesque wounds of the strange moose calf, cleaning the wounds and changing the bandages. Despite its horrific injuries, the calf seemed to be recuperating well, the dried blood forming protective scabs that showed no signs of infection but did bear the menacing shape so similar to the symbols he had seen in that cursed book. He decided to let his horse out of its solitary stall and allow him to roam in the larger pen with the goats. He watched them with care for a while, making sure they would get along. To his relief, all the animals seemed even-tempered. Rory had always loved animals and paid greater attention than most to their well-being. The pen was a bustling place now, housing his horse and 2 goats. He kept the moose calf separated in its stall just in case. There was no need to risk further injury to the little creature. He busied himself with filling their water troughs and feed buckets. Despite the steady drizzle, he spent much of the day outdoors. Being a man of hard work, he couldn't help but give the stable a thorough cleaning and tend to the overgrown garden. The onset of winter made the tidying up all the more necessary. He was pleasantly surprised to find a variety of vegetables and fruits still thriving amid the neglected patch. The salvageable produce was promptly gathered and taken inside for storage. These activities served as a welcome distraction from the unnerving presence of his great uncle, who continued to babble incoherently, arms still tied to the bedpost. Rory did make sure to attend to his uncle as well, giving him water and attempting to feed the man. The water went down this time, but the food did not. He also guided his uncle to the outhouse at one point, a task he had not even considered when he had first set out here as caretaker. He was always sure to secure the old man's wrists back to the bedpost whenever he left him alone. The unsettling event from the night before was still fresh in his memory. As the day wore on, the rain intensified, keeping Rory indoors. He focused himself on household chores. It was while sweeping the cabin's floors that his attention was caught by something he had overlooked before. A hidden hatch in the floorboards just beneath a small carpet in the sitting area. He lifted the heavy door and took in a breath of shock. Instead of the expected rickety old ladder leading down to a small dirt cellar, there were actual stone stairs that went down to a sizable room. Intrigued, he thought that the cool, dark place could serve as an ideal storage area for all the freshly picked produce he had found in the garden. After stacking the gathered fruits and vegetables from the day's gardening into a few empty wooden crates, Rory cradled one of them in his left arm while carrying a pocket lighter in his right. Lighting his way, he began his descent down the darkened steps, only to find a series of lanterns mounted on the walls. He ignited each in turn, gradually dispelling the cellar's gloom. To his surprise, the underground expanse mirrored the cabin's ground floor in size. The foundation, crafted from mason stone bricks and bolstered by heavy wood beams, hinted at a more formidable structure than the quaint cabin above. In this shadowed realm, an unsettling tableau awaited him. Preserved animals, their lifeless glass eyes staring blankly, crowded the shelves, giving the cellar an ambience akin to a macabre gallery. Drawn closer by curiosity, Rory's eyes settled on a red fox, its form meticulously posed mid-stride atop a wooden board. Its artificial gaze seemed haunting, yet what truly chilled him were the symbols etched onto its hide, eerily mirroring those on the injured moose calf. The grim revelation was clear. His uncle, it appeared, had repeatedly committed these heinous acts. Rory's heart plummeted. The depth of his compassion for animals made this discovery near unforgivable. Could he truly care for someone capable of such cruelty? More unsettling discoveries lay ahead. Scattered on metallic trays were instruments of dubious intent. While their design hinted at surgical purposes, the sinister stain they bore hinted at far darker uses. Among them was a device seemingly meant to pry open wounds, another resembling pliers for tooth extraction, and a set of keen-edged knives. Disturbingly intertwined with these were objects of clerical origin: wands, intricately designed bowls, and chalices adorned with stones and cryptic etchings. The unsettling fusion of arcane and surgical implements sent tremors through Rory's frame. Next, the chalk inscriptions on the basement floor nearly had Rory retreating to the stairs. Their intricate and menacing patterns were filled with cryptic symbols he recognized from the cursed book. The realization that these markings were remnants of dark sorcery intensified the oppressive dread the cabin seemed to exude. He had unearthed more proof, the root of his uncle's apparent madness. The old man either succumbed to insanity through his chilling beliefs, or more unsettlingly, the dark forces he dabbled with had genuinely overtaken his soul. Such thoughts chilled Rory to the bone, and even as a generally non-religious man, he found himself entertaining the possibility of their truth. Clearly, the cellar was a sanctuary for this malevolent craft. Distancing himself from such disturbing artifacts, Rory's gaze settled on the many canvases stacked against the walls. Evidently, the old man was responsible for the paintings adorning the walls upstairs as well. Multi-talented, Rory remarked, surveying the surrounding artworks. Their subject matter held the same macabre tone as those above. A wooden easel stood in the center of the room, with a small chair positioned before it. On it was an unfinished portrait, a work in progress that was most likely halted by his uncle's deteriorating mind. Approaching the painting, Rory felt his heart rate escalate as the subject became clearer. An icy grip of realization tightened around him. The exquisitely detailed portrait was of Rory. In a shock, the crate of vegetables he had been cradling under one arm fell to the ground, its contents spilling out. Panic coursed through him. He hadn't seen his uncle since infancy, and in accordance with his mother's words, there had only been a few brief encounters. How could the old man possibly know his matured features with such precision? This revelation, combined with everything else he'd witnessed, solidified his belief in the supernatural events transpiring within these walls. As if in response to the fallen crate of produce, suddenly, from the dark recesses of the basement, a deep, guttural growl rolled. The haunting echo resounding off the stone walls, infiltrating his bones. The raw animosity in the sound suggested a predatory intent. An overpowering sense of self-preservation drowned him, and Rory scrambled towards the steps, every fiber of his being desperate to escape the ominous basement. He could have sworn he had heard something breathing behind him, but when he turned to slam the cellar door shut, there was nothing there. He slammed the hatch anyway, and placed the remaining crates on top of it, securing its closure. Once safely above ground, Rory sought solace in a dusty bottle of whiskey he had noticed earlier tucked in the kitchen cupboards. He took a generous gulp, the liquor burning its path down his throat, an attempt to steady his trembling nerves. Now the storm outside was raging, rain pelting the roof with a vengeance, and the windows rattled under the relentless onslaught of the wind. Rory was standing with his back to the main room of the cabin. As he stood there with the bottle of whiskey in hand, he could hear the sound of his uncle's incessant babbling above the raging storm, as if closer than from within the confines of the bedroom, the familiar haunting phrasing echoing through the cabin. It was a disturbing symphony, the elements outside and the madness inside, playing off each other, amplifying the sense of chaos and dread that was quickly consuming Rory. The soft screech of chalk against wood abruptly sliced through the cacophony. Heart pounding, Rory slowly turned around to face the main room behind him. His blood ran cold at the sight that unraveled before him. His uncle had somehow managed to free himself from his restraints and now sat hunched over the cabin floor. In his gnarled hand, he clutched a piece of chalk, using it to draw a complex circle filled with the same menacing symbols Rory had found in the cursed book and on the basement floor. His uncle had situated himself in the center of the intricate design, his gaze vacant and crazed, as he wailed the same haunting phrase into the stormy night. Atanka gani wacha. His voice echoed throughout the cabin, each syllable dripping with an unfathomable darkness that chilled Rory to his core. Paralyzed with fear, Rory was jolted back to reality by a sudden knock on the cabin door. Everything was happening so fast, he could hardly keep himself from screaming. His heart was pounding like a wild drum, but a part of him had the irrational hope that someone had come to save him. He pictured his mother on the other side of the door. Perhaps she had sensed the danger he was in and had come to rescue him. He knew the thought was absurd, but he couldn't help but approach the door, a glimmer of hope emanating from within him. Even if it was just a passerby, he would be grateful for their arrival. Anyone to accompany him during this moment of terror, he would embrace with zeal. Opening the door, his eyes met an astonishing sight. The baby moose stood there, drenched from the rain, its bandages fallen away to reveal the strange cryptic symbols that mirrored those now drawn in chalk on the floor behind him. The scars now seemed to glow with a green surreal illumination. The little creature's eyes, previously soft with innocence and pain, now blazed with a sinister crimson light. Backing away from the cursed creature, a sudden force pulled Rory off his feet. His uncle had leaped at him from the circle and clasped his arms around him in a vice-like grip, pulling him to the cabin floor with unexpected strength. A shriek tore from Rory's lips as he struggled against the old man's hold, but his efforts were futile. The unhinged senior seemed to be imbued with a supernatural might that kept Rory pinned to the ground. The baby moose advanced calmly, its haunting red eyes never leaving Rory. The creature leaned down, placing its face directly in front of his own, a mere breath away. As Rory screamed in pure terror, a plume of green smoke seeped from the moose's nostrils, snaking its way into Rory's open mouth. The world spun and he faded to black, and he lost consciousness. Rory woke with a jolt, finding himself sprawled face up in the middle of the chalk-drawn circle, the cold, lifeless body of his uncle lying beside him. The baby moose had vanished, and the cabin door was swinging open in the wind, letting in a chilling draft and splatters of rain. Rising to his feet, he felt a sudden, horrifying displacement of self, an alien feeling that his own body was no longer under his control. A voice echoed within his mind, the timbre menacing and gleeful. "My apologies, lad," it said in a sickening sweet tone, each word sending icy shivers down Rory's spine. "I required a new vessel, and your young, sturdy form serves my purpose perfectly. Your uncle was an ideal host for many years, but alas, his fragile mind can no longer sustain me. You, on the other hand, will prove far more enduring." A cold realization pierced Rory. Like a dagger through his heart, the demonic entity that consumed his uncle's sanity had now claimed him. He felt the vestiges of his own consciousness slipping away, subsumed by an encroaching darkness that threatened to erase his very identity. He moved to shut the cabin door, feeling the detached precision of his actions as if he were a puppet controlled by invisible strings. Whistling a tune, the entity within Rory began the macabre task of cleaning up, its cheerfulness horrifying a contrast to the grim scene. It contemplated reaching out to Rory's mother with a nicely written letter assuring his safety, soothing her worries with a web of comforting lies. After all, the woman had always been so anxious, and it would be a shame to add to her stress. A lament hung heavy in the air, a final dirge to Rory's pure, noble spirit now cruelly displaced. The haunted cabin had claimed another innocent soul, the darkness thriving on the vulnerability of a young man who had set out with nothing but good intentions. The new Rory picked up a journal from one of the many bookshelves and made a new entry. "In the dark woods, my cabin set, a stage for a sinister puppet's duet. Tales are told and whispers met, of a sorrow they'll never forget. Old timbers groan, a grim delight, under the ghostly moon's pale light. The cabin's new tenant's plight, sorry, but it's a demon's right. Good folks, your fears well placed. In the cabin, terror's embraced. A fresh host, his life effaced. Apologies, it's just my taste."